I never imagined I'd be standing there, surrounded by ashes, staring at what was left of my vacation home. But there I was, looking at the ruins. My cabin, the one place I could escape to from the madness of city life, was now just a pile of burned rubble. And I knew exactly who was behind it, the Fairview Shores Homeowners Association. It all started a few months ago when I received a letter from Samantha Rivers, the president of the HOA. She was demanding that I pay an amenity upkeep fee for the community golf course. The problem? My cabin wasn't even in their jurisdiction. It sat on private land just outside the HOA's reach. I wasn't responsible for paying. I called her right away. "Samantha, I don't owe you anything. My property isn't even in your HOA," I added, making sure she heard me loud and clear. Her tone dripped with superiority. "Jake, the golf course is for the benefit of the entire community," she said. "It's only fair that all homeowners contribute." "I don't use your golf course," I shot back. "And I don't live in your HOA." She let out a big, exaggerated sigh. "Well, that's unfortunate. It would be a shame if your property were deemed non-compliant." I hung up, knowing exactly what kind of game she was playing. Samantha had a long track record of bullying homeowners into paying fees that weren't theirs. But I wasn't going to be her next target. I had all my paperwork, my property lines, and my rights firmly on my side. I ignored her threats and went on with my life. That's when the fines started coming. One for having excessive vegetation, and another for failing to maintain community standards. Pure nonsense. I sent them right back with a note. "Not in your HOA. Stop harassing me." Samantha didn't take kindly to being ignored. A few weeks later, I caught 2 HOA board members on my security cameras trespassing on my land and taking pictures of my cabin. I confronted them, but they scurried off like cockroaches. It was clear they were trying to build a false case against me. Then one night, I got a call from my neighbor, Ethan. "Jake, your cabin, it's on fire." I raced down the highway, heart pounding. By the time I got there, firefighters were battling the flames, but it was too late. My place was gone. The fire marshal called it suspicious. No lightning, no electrical issues. Someone had deliberately set the fire, and I had a strong hunch about who was behind it. The next morning, I stormed into the Fairview Shores HOA office right in the middle of their board meeting. Samantha was sitting at the head of the table, wearing her usual smug expression. "Burning down my property? That's a new low even for you," I growled. Samantha pretended to be innocent, putting a hand on her chest. "Jake, whatever are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I snapped. "My security cameras caught your people snooping around before the fire." Her smile didn't falter. "That's unfortunate, but if your property was a safety hazard, maybe it was just nature's way of handling things." That was the last straw. I wasn't just going to expose her, I was going to make sure she paid. I walked out of that meeting and headed straight to my lawyer's office. I wasn't going to let this slide. If Samantha thought I'd just roll over, she had no idea who she was messing with. I sat across from my attorney, Lucas Hayes, a man with a calm, calculated demeanor that made even the toughest HOA board members nervous. The office smelled faintly of leather and old books. This was the kind of place where legal battles had been fought and won for decades. Lucas flipped through the stack of documents I'd brought in, property deeds, stills from the security footage, and copies of the bogus fines the HOA had sent. He didn't say a word at first, just read through everything. After a moment, he set the papers down and leaned back, steepling his fingers. "They really thought they could get away with this," he said. "Samantha's been running this HOA like her own little kingdom for years. But arson? That's next-level reckless." I clenched my fists. "I don't just want compensation," I said through gritted teeth. "I want them buried." Lucas's lips tightened as he tapped a pen on the desk. "We have enough here to start a civil case right away, but if we want criminal charges, we need something solid. The fire marshal's report says it's suspicious, but we need direct proof that they were involved in setting the fire." I exhaled sharply. "I've got security footage of those board members snooping around before the fire. That's a start." Lucas nodded. "It's a start, but I need something more concrete." If we can get financial records, internal emails, anything tying them directly to this, I can make sure they don't just lose a lawsuit. I'll make sure they lose everything. I knew exactly where to go next. The following morning, I drove over to Ethan's house. He'd been at odds with the HOA for years after refusing to let them dictate the color of his roof. If anyone had dirt on the HOA, it was him. Ethan greeted me at the door, looking grim. "I figured you'd be coming by," he said. "Samantha's been really pleased with herself lately," I said, following him inside. His living room was cluttered with old newspapers and a corkboard covered in pinned documents. "She's been running a slush fund," Ethan said, pulling a file from a drawer. "She takes HOA fees meant for community upkeep, then moves the money around to cover personal expenses. I've been tracking it for years." My heart raced as I flipped through the papers. "Lucas is going to love this." "That's not all," Ethan added. "I've got a friend who works at the local fire department. He told me they found an accelerant near the foundation of your cabin. Kerosene." My jaw tightened. "You think Samantha had someone set the fire?" Ethan scoffed. "I'd bet my house on it. And I think I can prove it." He pulled out a USB drive. "I hacked into the HOA's security system a while back. Don't ask how. I set up a backdoor that lets me pull saved footage from their cameras. You might want to take a look at what happened the night of a fire." I plugged the drive into my laptop and scrolled through the files. Then I found it. A grainy black and white video showed two figures sneaking onto my property in the dead of night. One carried a canister. The other struck a match. I cursed under my breath. "That's all the proof we need." Ethan grinned. "Time to take them down." That evening, Lucas's office was buzzing with energy. He'd already started drafting the lawsuit, but this new evidence changed everything. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "This isn't just a civil case anymore," he said. "This is criminal arson." With the footage, the fire marshal's report, and the financial records tying Samantha to illegal activity, we had everything we needed to trigger a full investigation. I couldn't help but grin. Let's make sure she never runs a neighborhood again. Lucas didn't waste a second. He immediately sent the evidence to the district attorney's office, the fire marshal, and the state housing authority. After that, he filed the civil lawsuit, seeking compensation for the damage done to Jake's cabin and for something else. "Samantha's been misusing HOA funds," Lucas said, finalizing the paperwork. "That means any assets tied to the HOA, including that golf course, could be up for grabs if we win." Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "You're telling me I might end up owning their golf course?" Lucas smirked. "If we play this right, you'll be getting more than just that." The lawsuit hit Fairview Shores like an explosion. At first, Samantha tried to brush it off, calling the accusations baseless. But when the sheriff's department arrived with a warrant, everything started to unravel quickly. Jake stood outside the HOA office, arms crossed, as officers hauled boxes of files out the door. Samantha stood nearby, her face drained of color, watching everything fall apart. When she spotted Jake, she walked over, her usual smugness replaced with thinly veiled panic. "You think this is going to ruin me?" she hissed. Jake looked her straight in the eye. "I don't think." "I know." Samantha's confident facade crumbled. She spun on her heel and stormed inside. Lucas walked up to Jake, both of them watching the chaos unfold. "Once the audit is complete, we'll have enough leverage to push for full asset forfeiture." Jake breathed out, feeling a weight start to lift. "Good. Let's make sure they can't do this to anyone else." The battle wasn't over, but Samantha and her corrupt HOA were finally outmatched. Jake wasn't going to stop until every last one of them faced the consequences for their actions. The courtroom was packed, with residents from Fairview Shores filling the gallery, whispering among themselves as the judge took his seat. Samantha sat at the defendant's table, her lips pressed into a tight line as she shuffled through a pile of papers with her attorney. The usual arrogance in her posture had been replaced by nervous tension. She knew what was coming. Jake adjusted his tie, feeling Lucas's calm presence beside him. They had spent weeks putting together a solid case, and now it was time to close it. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage showing HOA board members trespassing, financial records proving funds were mishandled, and the final knockout punch, the footage of the arsonist in action, which law enforcement had linked to HOA members. Samantha's attorney tried to claim that the trespassers were just conducting a safety inspection, but the judge wasn't buying it. When Lucas presented the financial records, Samantha's face went pale. The audit had uncovered years of embezzlement, maintenance fees disguised as regular payments, with thousands funneled into personal accounts. Lucas locked eyes with the judge. Not only did the HOA extort homeowners, but they also retaliated against my client. They set fire to private property to send a message and used stolen funds to finance their operations. Samantha's attorney stood up, his voice controlled but strained. These are serious allegations. My client had no knowledge of any criminal activity. Lucas interrupted him, holding up a single sheet of paper. Then, explain this. It was a signed approval from Samantha Rivers herself, authorizing HOA funds to be used for special projects, the same account that paid one of the arsonists for consulting just a day before the fire. A wave of murmurs spread through the gallery. Samantha's grip tightened on the table, her knuckles turning white. The judge leaned forward. Miss Rivers, can you explain this transaction? Samantha opened her mouth but couldn't find any words. Lucas let the silence linger. Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself, he said. This was a deliberate act of destruction, fueled by greed and abuse of power. The judge let out a sharp breath, flipping through the documents before locking eyes with Samantha. Given the overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct, fraud, and criminal activity, I find in favor of the plaintiff. Restitution will be paid in full, and the HOA's assets will be liquidated to cover the damages. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Samantha's attorney turned white, whispering angrily in her ear. She shook her head, jaw clenched, but there was no escaping it now. Jake stood as the judge finalized the ruling. He had won, but the battle wasn't over. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded in, shoving microphones forward. Residents of Fairview Shores gathered, their faces a mix of relief and anger. The HOA had held sway over them for years, and now they wanted answers. Ethan slapped Jake on the back. You did it. The whole neighborhood's been waiting for this, he added. Jake nodded, watching Samantha force her way through the crowd, her face stormy. She had lost her power, her wealth, and soon her home. The HOA was going to be dissolved, and its assets, including the golf course, would be used to cover the damages. Lucas walked up to them, holding a stack of papers. The transfer's already underway. Once the liquidation's done, the golf course and the rest of the community assets will be in your name, Lucas added. Jake glanced toward the golf course, the very one Samantha had tried to extort for money. Now it was his. Ethan grinned. What are you going to do with it? Jake folded his arms. Thought I might open it up to the public. Free access for the community. No more ridiculous fees. A cheer rose from the residents gathered around them. The HOA had held the neighborhood in its grip for years, but now the community would finally belong to the people who lived there. Samantha's car screeched out of the parking lot, tires screaming as she fled. But there was nowhere for her to hide. The state attorney was already preparing charges. Lucas adjusted his cufflinks. She won't be running any HOAs from a prison cell. Jake breathed a sigh of relief, the weight of months of struggle finally lifting. He had come here to fight for his home, but in the end, he had reclaimed something bigger, justice. And the neighborhood would never again fall under the control of a corrupt HOA. Jake stood at the edge of the golf course, the wind carrying the scent of freshly mown grass. In the distance, a few residents were already enjoying their newfound freedom, taking advantage of the grounds without the oppressive fees the HOA had once imposed. The transformation was happening faster than Jake had expected. Without the HOA's iron grip, the neighborhood was starting to come back to life. Lucas had been right. The liquidation of assets had gone smoothly, and the community was now officially free from HOA rule. As for Samantha, she was facing a legal nightmare. The state had moved quickly, filing charges for embezzlement and conspiracy to commit arson, while her remaining supporters had scattered like leaves in the wind. Ethan approached, his boots crunching on the gravel path. He pointed toward the clubhouse, the last piece of the HOA's grip on the neighborhood. A few of the old board members were still holding onto the hope that something could be salvaged, but deep down, they knew it was a lost cause. I was thinking about it too, Ethan said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. That building could be turned into a great community center, he added. A real place for the people, not just some exclusive hideout for those power-hungry control freaks. Jake paused, considering the idea. The clubhouse had been Samantha's kingdom, where she ruled over the neighborhood like it was her own personal empire. Turning it into something useful seemed like a fitting way to honor what they had fought for. Not a bad idea, Jake agreed. No more fees, no more dumb rules, just a place everyone can use. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Bet Samantha would have a heart attack if she knew what we were planning. Jake wasn't concerned about Samantha anymore, though. Last he heard, she was scrambling to cut a plea deal to avoid a long prison sentence. With all the evidence stacked against her, though, she wasn't likely to walk away free. As they talked, an older woman approached them with a hesitant smile. She introduced herself as Emily, a longtime resident who had lived under the HOA's thumb for years. "You don't know how much this means to us," she said, her eyes scanning the area. "For years, we were too scared to say anything. They fined us for everything, threatened us if we questioned them. It's like we can finally breathe again." Jake nodded, remembering well the atmosphere of fear Samantha had fostered. He had seen it firsthand, the way Samantha used intimidation as her weapon. It wasn't just about making money, it was about controlling people. She had twisted the HOA's authority into a tool for keeping everyone in line. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Jake told her, his voice steady. Emily's eyes lit up with gratitude. "If you ever need anything, just say the word." As she walked away, Ethan pointed toward the parking lot, where a sheriff's car had just pulled up. Two officers stepped out, scanning the area before heading into the clubhouse. "Looks like they're putting the final nails in the coffin," Ethan remarked. Jake knew exactly why they were here. The HOA's records had already been seized, but law enforcement was still sifting through the mess. More charges were likely on the way for the remaining board members who had been part of Samantha's schemes. Inside the clubhouse, the air was thick with tension. A few former board members sat rigidly at a long table while the officers questioned them. Jake and Ethan lingered near the doorway, watching as one of the officers approached a man in his 50s, a former HOA treasurer who had been deeply involved in the financial mismanagement. "We've got some questions about your involvement in the misallocation of funds," the officer said, pulling out a folder. "It'd be in your best interest to cooperate." The man swallowed hard, casting a nervous glance at his old colleagues. None of them moved to defend him. The HOA's collapse had torn them apart, each person now looking out for their own skin. Jake leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "Funny how fast they turn on each other when the heat's on," Ethan said with a smirk. They were never in it for the neighborhood. It was all about themselves. The officers kept asking questions, and it was clear that more arrests were coming soon. The fallout from the lawsuit hadn't just dismantled the HOA. It had exposed the deep corruption that had been festering within it. Stepping outside, Jake glanced back at the clubhouse one last time. Soon, it would be part of the community, a symbol of what they'd taken back. "You ever think about staying?" Ethan asked out of the blue. Jake thought about it for a moment. The vacation home had always been his escape, a place to get away. But now, with the HOA gone, the neighborhood didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like a place that was starting to rebuild, to heal. "Maybe," Jake said after a pause. "Still got a lot to figure out." Ethan slapped him on the back. "Well, whatever you decide, you did something big here. People won't forget it." As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the golf course, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The fight was over. The HOA was gone, and for the first time in ages, the neighborhood was truly free. Jake stood beneath the towering oak tree at the edge of the golf course, watching as a group of neighborhood kids ran across the grass, their laughter echoing through the air. It was a strange sight, seeing life return to a place that had once been a symbol of Samantha's oppressive rule. For so long, the HOA had treated it like their own private playground, restricting access to anyone who couldn't afford their outrageous fees. Now, it was open to everyone. No more barriers, no more restrictions, just land for the whole community to enjoy. Ethan leaned against a nearby bench, his arms crossed as he surveyed the area. His usual laid-back demeanor was tinged with something more, a quiet satisfaction. He'd spent years fighting against the HOA, and now that their hold had been shattered, he could finally see the neighborhood becoming what it was always meant to be. A man in his late 40s walked toward them, his step slow and uncertain. Jake recognized him instantly, Maxwell Stone, one of the few former board members who had distanced himself from Samantha before everything fell apart. He had been involved in some of the HOA's shady dealings, but unlike the others, he had shown genuine remorse when the whole situation started crumbling. Maxwell cleared his throat and stopped a few feet away. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I had to come," he said quietly. Jake didn't respond immediately. He studied Maxwell, noting the way his shoulders slumped and the guilt that was evident on his face. There had been a time when Maxwell had been fully on Samantha's side, enforcing her rules without question. But that time was long gone. Ethan stood silently by, watching the interaction with mild curiosity. Maxwell shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I just wanted to say that I was wrong about all of it. I should have spoken up sooner, but I was too worried about my own position. When the lawsuit hit, I finally realized how deep we had all gotten into Samantha's schemes. I never thought it would go that far," he added, shaking his head. Jake didn't let him off the hook that easily. "You knew what was happening," he said flatly. "Maybe you didn't start the fire, but you sure as hell kept throwing gas on it. You helped enforce those fake fines. You stood by while she bled people dry." Maxwell exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "I did, and I regret it, but I want to help fix things now. I've been talking to some of the residents, the ones who were too scared to speak up before. They want to rebuild, not just the neighborhood, but the trust that was lost." Jake thought for a moment. The damage Samantha had done wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. She had turned neighbors against each other, made them scared to stand up for themselves. Undoing all of that wouldn't be easy. Maxwell pulled a folder from under his arm and handed it over. "This is everything I could get my hands on. Old financial records, internal emails, stuff that might help with the ongoing investigation. I'm not sure how much of it is still relevant, but I figured Lucas might want to see it." Jake took the folder and flipped through the pages. More discrepancies, more signs of Samantha's shady dealings. It wasn't just the slush fund. There were indications that she had been skimming off contracts, inflating maintenance costs, and pocketing the difference. Ethan let out a soft whistle. "She really went all in, didn't she?" Maxwell gave a brief nod. "Yeah, she thought she was untouchable. That's why she got so brazen." Maxwell paused for a moment, clearly thinking things over. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I want to help fix whatever's left, no matter what it takes." Jake closed the folder, sliding it under his arm. He wasn't sure if Maxwell could ever truly atone for what he'd done, but at least he was trying. "You want to help?" Jake asked after a beat. "Then start by making sure the community hears the truth. They need to hear it from someone who knows what went on inside." Maxwell nodded without hesitation. "I can do that." Ethan watched Maxwell walk off before turning back to Jake. "You really think they'll forgive him?" "They don't have to forgive him," Jake replied. "But they deserve to know the truth. And if he's willing to help clean up the mess he helped make, I'm not going to stop him." Ethan seemed satisfied with that answer. He glanced over at the clubhouse, where a group of volunteers were already planning renovations. The building wouldn't be the headquarters of a tyrannical HOA anymore. It would become a space for the community, a place where people could gather without the fear of being extorted. As the sun sank lower, Lucas showed up, his usual composed self. He carried a briefcase, walking with purpose as he approached. "Just got off the phone with the DA's office," he said, setting the briefcase on the nearest bench. "They're moving forward with additional charges. Turns out Samantha wasn't just mishandling funds. She was laundering money through fake vendors. Some of her contractors weren't even real." Ethan let out a quiet laugh. She actually thought she could get away with all this. She got away with it for years, Lucas replied, but now she's out of options. The evidence is piling up, and with Maxwell's new documents, they've got enough to charge her with even more counts of fraud. Jake shot Lucas a look, his eyebrows raised. She's looking at some serious time, Jake said, nodding. It was exactly what she deserved. Lucas handed over a set of finalized papers. And as for you, Lucas added, the golf course and clubhouse are officially yours. The legal transfer is complete. Jake took the papers, letting the weight of the moment sink in. What had once been Samantha's tool of control was now his. He'd never planned to own a golf course, but now that he did, he knew exactly what to do with it. No more HOA, Jake said, glancing at Ethan. No more restrictions. Just a place people can actually enjoy, Ethan grinned. Sounds like a plan. With the legal battle behind him and the neighborhood beginning to heal, Jake finally felt a sense of closure. The HOA had taken so much from him, his vacation home, his peace of mind. But in the end, he'd gotten back more than he'd lost. And Samantha Rivers? She was going to spend a long time answering for everything she'd done. No more manipulation. No more power grabs. Her reign was over. Jake turned toward the golf course, watching as families gathered, free from the HOA's suffocating grip. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood truly belonged to the people again. And that was worth more than anything Samantha had ever tried to take. Jake stood on the elevated patio of what was once the Fairview Shores HOA clubhouse, now just a few signatures away from being transformed into a public community center. It had taken months of legal battles, endless meetings, and an exhausting amount of paperwork. But this was the final step. The place had already started to change. Old, restrictive signs had been torn down. The banquet hall, once exclusive, now served as a space for community gatherings. And the oppressive atmosphere Samantha had created was finally gone. Ethan leaned against the railing beside him, arms crossed as he watched a group of kids race across the golf course with their dogs. It was a sight that would have been unthinkable under the HOA's control. I gotta say, Ethan mused, never thought I'd see this place without those ridiculous members-only plaques everywhere. Jake exhaled, watching the way the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the green. Feels different, doesn't it? He said. Like the whole neighborhood finally took a breath after holding it in for years. Ethan nodded. And now that Samantha's out of the picture, people are actually talking to each other again. No more fear of fines. No more power-hungry people nitpicking everything. Jake spotted Maxwell standing near the entrance, flipping through a thick folder. Maxwell had been working closely with some of the residents, helping them break free from the HOA's control. His presence had been met with skepticism at first, but his willingness to come clean and undo the damage had started to earn him some trust. Maxwell walked over, his face a mix of relief and exhaustion. Just got the final approval from the county. With this, the HOA's assets are officially dissolved, and the remaining funds are being returned to the homeowners they extorted. Jake took the papers and skimmed through the signatures. It was done. The last remnants of Samantha's rule had been wiped away. Ethan let out a low whistle. So what happens now? You sticking around or heading back to the city? Jake had been thinking about that. Originally, this had all been about reclaiming what was his, making sure Samantha and her cronies paid for what they'd done. But somewhere along the way, it had become something bigger. I don't know yet, he admitted. This place wasn't supposed to be permanent, but after everything we've been through, it's hard to just walk away. Ethan grinned. Well, if you do stay, I'm sure the neighborhood wouldn't mind having you around. You're basically a folk hero at this point. Before Jake could respond, Emily came over with a tray of drinks, offering them with a grateful smile. She had become one of the most vocal supporters of the transition, stepping into a leadership role as the community began to rebuild. We're planning a big event next weekend, she said, handing Jake a glass of iced tea. A celebration, no speeches, no formalities, just the neighborhood finally getting to enjoy itself for the first time in years. Jake took a sip, the cold drink cutting through the warmth of the day. Sounds like a great way to mark the end of an era, he said. Emily's expression softened. More like the beginning of something better. As the sun dipped lower, laughter and conversation filled the air. The clubhouse, once a place of rigid control and exclusion, now hummed with life. Families gathered at tables, kids played freely, and the air no longer carried the weight of HOA rule. Maxwell stood near the entrance, watching everything unfold with a thoughtful look on his face. Jake glanced at him, regretting not stepping away from Samantha sooner. Maxwell let out a deep breath. Every day. But seeing this, it helps. Ethan nudged Jake. Come on, let's head inside. I hear they raided the old HOA storage room and found some of Samantha's official memorabilia. Apparently, she had plaques with her name on them. Jake chuckled. Let me guess, gold lettering, oversized, impossible to ignore? Emily laughed. You have no idea. Someone suggested using them as doorstops, she added. The thought of Samantha's name being reduced to something as mundane as a door wedge felt fitting. As they stepped inside, Jake glanced back at the golf course, now a place of freedom and community instead of control and greed. This fight had started as a battle for his own justice, but it had become something much bigger. He had gotten back what was his, yes, but in doing so, he had helped free an entire neighborhood. And that, more than anything, was a victory he wouldn't trade for the world. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like.